The new Cold War may already be here. But this time, the wall is not concrete. It is made of chips, rare earths, tariffs, export licenses, AI models, factories, shipping routes, sanctions, currencies, and supply chains. America and China are not simply competing over land or ideology. They're competing over the machinery of the future. And if this invisible wall keeps rising, ordinary people will feel it in prices, jobs, shortages, markets, security, and the power of nations to decide their own future. For most of the 20th century, the Cold War had a symbol everyone could understand: the Berlin Wall. It was physical, it was visible. It cut through streets, families, neighborhoods, and history. It told the world, in concrete and barbed wire, that the planet had been divided into opposing systems. One side looked at the other across guarded checkpoints. Armies waited. Intelligence networks listened. Nuclear weapons stood behind every diplomatic sentence. That world was dangerous, but its central image was clear. There was a wall. The new confrontation between America and China may never produce one single wall that can be photographed from the air. There may be no checkpoint Charlie for the age of artificial intelligence. No single line where one world ends and another begins. Instead, the new wall is being built in silence, through forms, licenses, regulations, trade rules, customs codes, blacklists, investment reviews, sanctions packages, mineral restrictions, subsidy programs, technology bans, and data controls. It does not divide one city, it divides systems. A company may discover that it can no longer sell an advanced chip to a Chinese customer. A factory may discover that a mineral it needs now requires an export license. A university lab may discover that a collaboration has become politically sensitive. A European equipment maker may discover that its machines are no longer just machines, but strategic assets. A country may discover that the supply chain it trusted for 30 years is now a pressure point. This is the economic Iron Curtain. Not a single barrier, but a network of barriers. Not a clean separation, but a growing suspicion inside the arteries of the world economy. For decades, globalization was built around one great assumption: efficiency. If something could be designed in California, manufactured in Taiwan, assembled in China, packaged in Malaysia, shipped through Singapore, financed in dollars, insured in London, and sold in Europe, then that was not a weakness. It was the triumph of open markets. The system rewarded speed, scale, and price. Companies asked where production was cheapest. Investors asked where margins were highest. Consumers asked why products could not be cheaper still. Governments often believed that trade would soften rivalry. If nations depended on one another, perhaps they would have too much to lose from conflict. That was the old promise. But now the question has changed. What if dependence does not prevent conflict? What if dependence becomes the battlefield? What if the same supply chains that once made war seem irrational now give governments new ways to threaten, punish, and pressure one another without firing a shot? That is the shift taking place. The modern economy was built around efficiency. The new economic order is being rebuilt around security. And once security becomes the central principle, everything looks different. A cheap imported component is no longer just a bargain. It may be a vulnerability. A foreign-owned platform is no longer just a service. It may be a data risk. A mineral refinery is no longer just an industrial facility. It may be a strategic choke point. A semiconductor fab is no longer just a private investment. It may be part of national survival. This is why the World Economic Forum's Global Risks Report 2026 identified geoeconomic confrontation as one of the most severe risks in the near term. The phrase sounds technical, almost bloodless, but it describes something very real. Governments using economic power deliberately to weaken rivals, influence partners, punish behavior, protect strategic industries, and force choices. Geo-economic confrontation means trade is no longer only trade. It means tariffs are not only taxes. Sanctions are not only legal penalties. Export controls are not only paperwork. Industrial subsidies are not only domestic politics. They are instruments of power. They can decide who gets technology, who gets capital, who gets minerals, who gets market access, and who gets cut off. This does not mean that a military war between America and China is inevitable. It does not mean the world has already split into two sealed camps. It does not mean one side is purely virtuous and the other side purely hostile. The reality is more complicated and more dangerous because it is complicated. Both Washington and Beijing are using economic tools strategically. The United States has tightened controls on advanced chips, semiconductor manufacturing equipment, and AI-related technologies headed toward China. The argument in Washington is that the most advanced technologies are not neutral when they can strengthen military systems, surveillance capabilities, cyber operations, and artificial intelligence. China, for its part, has used export controls on critical minerals and rare earth-related products, including materials important to defense, clean energy, electronics, and advanced manufacturing. The argument in Beijing is that China has the right to protect its national security, control strategic resources, and respond to foreign pressure. Each side says it is defending itself. Each side says the other is weaponizing the economy. And smaller countries are left trying to survive inside the contradiction. They want American security guarantees, Chinese markets, Taiwanese chips, European equipment, Japanese materials, Korean memory, cheap consumer goods, stable currencies, open shipping routes, and predictable rules. But the new world may not allow them to have all of these at once. That is what makes this confrontation different from ordinary trade competition. A normal trade dispute is about advantage. This is about control. Who controls the chip? Who controls the machine that makes the chip? Who controls the mineral inside the magnet? Who processes that mineral? Who writes the software used to design the circuit? Who owns the cloud that trains the model? Who clears the payment? Who insures the ship? Who grants the export license? Who can say yes? And who can say no? To understand why this matters, begin with the smallest object in modern life: the chip. A semiconductor is easy to underestimate because it disappears inside everything. It is not dramatic like a warship. It is not visible like an oil field. It does not look like a border. But chips now function like the industrial steel of the 21st century. They power phones, cars, satellites, aircraft, data centers, payment systems, hospitals, factories, energy grids, missiles, drones, cloud platforms, financial markets, and artificial intelligence. A nation without access to advanced chips does not simply lose faster computers. It risks falling behind in military modeling, code breaking, logistics, weapons guidance, scientific discovery, robotics, biotechnology, surveillance, manufacturing productivity, and AI. This is why semiconductors have become strategic territory. But the chip supply chain is not located in one country. That is the first important fact. Chips are designed, fabricated, etched, packaged, tested, assembled, and integrated through a chain so specialized that no single nation controls all of it. The United States remains central in advanced chip design and design software. Taiwan is dominant in the most advanced foundry manufacturing. The Netherlands matters because of ASML and the extreme ultraviolet lithography machines needed to produce the most advanced chips. Japan matters in materials and equipment. South Korea matters in memory. Malaysia matters in packaging and testing. China matters in assembly, manufacturing scale, mature node production, and the enormous demand that pulls the entire system forward. Europe matters in equipment, industrial standards, research, and some critical suppliers. The world does not have a simple chip factory. It has a chip civilization. And that civilization was built on the assumption that borders would remain open enough for everything to move. Now, that assumption is under pressure. When the United States restricts access to the most advanced AI chips or semiconductor manufacturing equipment, it is not merely blocking a sale. It is trying to slow China's access to the computational power needed for the next generation of AI and military-relevant technology. When Washington pressures allies such as the Netherlands and Japan to align export controls, it is recognizing that American policy alone is not enough. A chip restriction is only as strong as the choke points around it. If China cannot buy one chip but can still buy the machine that helps make it, the control is incomplete. If China cannot buy the machine but can acquire parts, talent, cloud access, or workarounds, the control becomes harder to enforce. This is why economic war is rarely clean. Controls can slow access. They can raise costs. They can create uncertainty. They can deny the most direct path. But they do not freeze history. They can also push the targeted country to invest more aggressively in domestic substitution, alternative designs, smuggling networks, efficiency improvements, and long-term self-reliance. That is the paradox. The more one side tries to block the other from the future, the more the other side may decide it must build that future alone. A Churchillian mind would recognize this immediately. Churchill understood that war, deterrence, and national survival were never only about soldiers. They were about factories, fuel, ships, steel, radar, code breaking, money, scientists, alliances, and public will. He would not look at a semiconductor plant and see only a business. He would see the hidden foundation of power. He would not look at lithography and say this is only engineering. He would understand that the nation able to produce the tools that produce the tools possesses a form of sovereignty others do not. And he would likely warn that dependence becomes dangerous when a rival can decide whether your factories continue to function. But he would also understand something else. Preparation is not the same as panic. Strength is not the same as hysteria. The purpose of resilience is not to make war inevitable. It is to make coercion less effective. The same logic applies to rare earths and critical minerals. The phrase rare earths can be misleading. Many of these elements are not rare in the simple geological sense. The strategic problem is not only where they exist in the ground, the problem is the chain. Mining is one stage, processing is another, refining is another, magnet manufacturing is another, end-use integration is another. And this is where China holds significant leverage. Rare earths and critical minerals matter because they appear inside electric vehicles, wind turbines, smartphones, radar systems, missiles, precision weapons, aircraft, batteries, medical devices, and advanced manufacturing. A modern military needs them. A clean energy transition needs them. A digital economy needs them. An AI-driven industrial base needs them. So when export controls or licensing delays affect these materials, the fear is immediate. Not because every factory stops overnight, but because alternative supply chains take years to build. You cannot create a complete rare earth processing industry with a press release. You cannot replace specialized magnet production in a single budget cycle. You cannot turn a mine into a secure industrial ecosystem without permitting, capital, expertise, environmental management, refining capacity, transport, customers, and time. This is why a small regulation can send anxiety through entire industries. An automaker may ask whether future motors can be produced on schedule. A defense contractor may ask whether guidance systems will face shortages. A clean energy company may ask whether turbine or battery plans still make sense. A government may ask whether it allowed a rival to dominate a quiet but essential layer of national power. And once that question is asked, the answer is rarely cheap. Countries begin stockpiling. Companies begin duplicating suppliers. Governments begin subsidizing domestic production. Allies begin forming mineral partnerships. Investors begin pricing political risk into what used to be ordinary industrial planning. The old model said, buy from the cheapest reliable supplier. The new model says, define what reliable means when politics changes. That one word, reliable, now carries the weight of strategy. The same transformation is happening with tariffs. For years, tariffs were often discussed as protectionist tools or bargaining instruments. But in the new environment, tariffs are also used to reshape production, pressure rivals, defend domestic industries, punish alleged unfair practices, and signal political strength. And they can be popular because they appear direct. They can also be expensive because importers, companies, and consumers often carry the cost. A tariff on a strategic good may protect a domestic factory. It may also raise the price of a car, a battery, an appliance, or a machine tool. This is the human side of geoeconomics. The economic Iron Curtain does not only appear in government documents, it appears in the checkout line, in the price of electronics, in the cost of vehicles, in the taxes used to fund industrial subsidies, in the jobs created by new factories, in the jobs lost when export markets close, in the pension funds exposed to volatile technology stocks, in the small business waiting for parts, in the family wondering why energy systems, cars, or appliances have become more expensive. Strategic competition may sound abstract until it reaches the monthly budget. That is why the new confrontation cannot be understood only through military maps. It must be understood through supply chain maps. Where is the chip designed? Where is it fabricated? Where is the machine built? Where is the mineral processed? Where is the software licensed? Where is the payment cleared? Where is the data stored? Where is the ship insured? Where is the factory financed? Every answer reveals a dependency, and every dependency can become a pressure point. The United States is trying to reduce the risk that China can use American or allied technology to accelerate military and AI capabilities. China is trying to reduce the risk that the United States and its allies can choke off its technological rise. Europe is trying to avoid becoming merely a battlefield of rules written elsewhere. Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, India, Vietnam, Mexico, and Southeast Asia are all trying to capture opportunity while avoiding strategic overexposure. Resource-rich countries are discovering that minerals once treated as commodities now carry geopolitical weight. And multinational companies are being forced to make decisions they spent decades avoiding. They must ask not only where production is cheapest, but where it is politically survivable. The result is not the death of globalization. That would be too simple. Global trade is not disappearing. Ships still move. Factories still export, companies still seek markets, consumers still buy products assembled across borders. But globalization is being reorganized, politicized, and securitized. It is becoming less innocent. The old dream was interdependence. The new fear is weaponized dependence. And this is where the comparison with the First Cold War becomes both useful and dangerous. It is useful because great power rivalry has returned to the center of world politics. It is useful because alliances matter again. It is useful because technology, ideology, intelligence, industry, and military power are once again connected. But it's dangerous because the world today is not divided as cleanly as it was after 1945. America and China are rivals, but they are also deeply connected. Their companies, consumers, investors, universities, supply chains, and financial systems have been intertwined for decades. Allies do not always agree. Trading partners do not always choose sides neatly. A country may rely on the United States for security, China for exports, Taiwan for chips, Europe for regulation, and the dollar for finance. This is not a simple wall, it is a maze, and yet the direction is visible. More export controls, more sanctions, more tariffs, more industrial policy, more investment screening, more technology bans, more data restrictions, more efforts to secure minerals, more pressure on companies to prove their loyalty to national security priorities. This is how an iron curtain can rise without a single speech announcing it. It rises when business decisions become security decisions. It rises when supply contracts become strategic vulnerabilities. It rises when factories become national assets. It rises when governments stop asking only how to grow and begin asking how to survive coercion. A Churchillian interpretation would not treat comfort as strategy. It would ask uncomfortable questions early. Can a country defend itself if it cannot produce the systems its defense depends on? Can it lead in AI if its advanced chips are controlled elsewhere? Can it electrify its economy if its mineral chain can be restricted? Can it sanction rivals if its own markets are too dependent to absorb retaliation? Can it protect freedom if the infrastructure of that freedom is built on foundations it does not control? These questions are not arguments for isolation. They are arguments for seriousness. No modern country can produce everything alone. No alliance can become resilient without trade. No economy can prosper by turning every dependency into paranoia. But there is a difference between openness and blindness. There is a difference between trade and strategic surrender. There is a difference between efficiency and safety. The First Cold War divided the world by ideology and armies. The new one may divide it by supply chains. And the most important battlefield may be the smallest object in modern life, the chip. The country that controls the most advanced compute does not merely control faster computers. It controls military modeling, code breaking, drone coordination, automated factories, scientific research, financial algorithms, surveillance systems, and the next generation of artificial intelligence. That is why the struggle over semiconductors is no longer only a commercial rivalry. It has become an industrial war over the future. Artificial intelligence may look like software to the public. A model answers a question. A system writes code. A platform generates an image. A company announces a new assistant, a new tool, a new breakthrough. But beneath the interface, AI is physical. It requires chips. It requires data centers. It requires electricity. It requires cooling. It requires cloud infrastructure. It requires specialized engineers, advanced manufacturing, complex supply chains, and enormous amounts of capital. There is no artificial intelligence without industrial intelligence behind it. And this is the part of the story that many people miss. The AI race is not only about who writes the best algorithm. It is about who can build and access the machines powerful enough to train, deploy, and scale those algorithms. A model that requires millions of dollars of compute is not just a scientific project, it is a strategic asset. A data center filled with advanced accelerators is not just a warehouse of servers, it is a factory for intelligence. And the nation that can produce, restrict, power, and organize that compute gains leverage across nearly every domain of modern power. This is why advanced chips have become the center of the confrontation. The most capable AI systems depend on high-performance processors, memory, networking equipment, advanced packaging, and software ecosystems. These components must work together at extraordinary speed and scale. A single chip matters, but the system around the chip matters just as much. Compute is not one object, it is a stack. At the bottom are minerals, wafers, chemicals, gases, and precision materials. Above that are tools that can etch patterns at microscopic scale. Above that are chip designs, electronic design automation software, lithography systems, deposition tools, inspection tools, and manufacturing expertise. Above that are packaging, testing, memory, interconnects, cooling systems, power systems, servers, data centers, cloud platforms, and AI software. Control one layer, and you have influence. Control several layers, and you have power. Control the choke points, and you can decide who advances quickly, who advances slowly, and who must pay more for every step forward. This is the logic behind America's export controls. Washington is not trying to stop every chip from reaching China. That would be impossible, and it would damage the world economy. The focus is narrower and more strategic. Advanced chips, semiconductor manufacturing equipment, and AI-related technologies that could strengthen China's military, surveillance, cyber, or strategic capabilities. The idea is simple. If China cannot easily access the most advanced AI chips, it may need more time, more money, and more energy to reach the same level of performance. If China cannot easily access the most advanced manufacturing equipment, it may face greater difficulty producing leading-edge chips domestically. If allies coordinate controls, the pressure becomes stronger because the semiconductor chain is not American alone. This is why the Netherlands matters. It is a small country in geographic terms, but in semiconductor strategy, it occupies one of the great choke points of the modern world. ASML, based in the Netherlands, produces lithography systems used by the world's leading chip makers. Its most advanced machines help create the incredibly small patterns required for cutting-edge semiconductors. Without those tools, the frontier of chip making becomes much harder to reach. This is why a machine can become geopolitical, not a missile, not a tank, not an aircraft carrier, a machine that prints patterns on silicon. A Churchillian mind would understand the significance instantly. In the Second World War, radar was not simply a scientific device. Aircraft production was not simply industrial output. Shipping capacity was not simply logistics. Fuel was not simply fuel. Each was a condition of survival. In our time, lithography, chip fabs, data centers, energy grids, cloud systems, and mineral refineries may play a similar role. A nation that does not control any part of the chain may still be rich. But in a crisis, richness is not the same as resilience. And resilience is now the word every serious government is learning to use. Taiwan sits at the center of this system, but Taiwan is not the whole system. That distinction matters. It is wrong to say that chips are made only in Taiwan. The semiconductor world is far more distributed. American companies remain central in design. Dutch equipment is essential in advanced lithography. Japanese firms play major roles in materials and tools. South Korea is critical in memory chips. Malaysia is important in packaging and testing. China is significant in assembly, electronics manufacturing, mature node production, and the enormous consumer and industrial demand that supports the global system. But Taiwan, through TSMC and its advanced foundry manufacturing, holds a position so important that geopolitical risk around the island is not merely a regional concern. It is a global technology concern. If the Taiwan Strait becomes unstable, the consequences would not be limited to military planners. They would reach car factories, smartphone makers, AI labs, cloud providers, defense contractors, financial markets, and governments everywhere. A shortage of advanced chips is not like a shortage of one consumer product. It can slow entire industries. It can delay vehicles. It can raise the cost of electronics. It can disrupt defense production. It can delay data center expansion. It can change the pace of artificial intelligence. This is why every major power is now trying to secure or expand chip capacity. The United States has pushed domestic semiconductor investment and subsidies. The European Union has its own chip ambitions. Japan is rebuilding parts of its semiconductor ecosystem. South Korea is defending and expanding its memory chip leadership. Taiwan remains central, but is also diversifying. China is investing heavily to reduce dependence on foreign tools, designs, and supply chains. The result is not one global market peacefully optimizing itself. It is an industrial race. And industrial races are expensive. Factories that once might have been built purely for efficiency are now built for security. Supply chains that once might have been concentrated in the lowest cost location are now duplicated, diversified, or politically screened. Governments are spending public money to pull production closer to home or closer to allies. This can create jobs. It can rebuild industrial capacity. It can reduce dependence on strategic rivals. But it can also raise costs, distort markets, and create subsidy competition between allies. Security is rarely free. When a chip factory is built for resilience rather than maximum efficiency, someone pays for the difference. Sometimes the taxpayer pays. Sometimes the consumer pays. Sometimes the company pays through lower margins. Sometimes the worker pays when old supply chains are disrupted faster than new ones can replace them. This is the financial side of the semiconductor war. Markets may reward the winners, chip designers, equipment makers, power providers, data center builders, cybersecurity firms, defense contractors, and selected mineral companies. But the same process can punish firms exposed to restricted trade, rising input costs, political retaliation, or uncertain access to China's market. A company can be brilliant and still become trapped between governments. Sell too much to China, and Washington may ask hard questions. Follow Washington too closely, and Beijing may retaliate. Depend on Taiwan, and investors worry about conflict. Depend on China for minerals, and customers worry about export controls. Depend on American software, and Chinese customers worry about sanctions. This is not normal business risk. This is geopolitical risk moving onto the balance sheet. Europe feels this pressure sharply. Europe wants technological sovereignty, but it remains exposed from several directions at once. It depends on American security and often American technology. It depends on Chinese demand and, in some areas, Chinese supply chains. It depends on Taiwan for advanced chip manufacturing. It depends on imported energy and imported materials. It has extraordinary strengths, including semiconductor equipment, industrial engineering, research, and high-end manufacturing. But it also faces high energy costs, limited private capital compared with the United States, slower technology scaling, and difficult internal politics. Reuters recently reported on warnings that Europe's chip sector faces a difficult future unless it secures raw materials, demand, capital, and strategic autonomy. The concern is not that Europe has no strengths. The concern is that strengths are not enough when the world is moving from open efficiency to hardened blocks. ASML is a perfect example. It is European. It is indispensable. It is also caught in the middle of American export control strategy and Chinese industrial ambition. A single company can become a diplomatic battlefield. That is the new reality. And the same pattern appears with rare earths and critical minerals. China can respond to chip restrictions by using leverage in minerals, processing, magnets, and other industrial inputs. The United States and its allies can respond by building alternative supply chains, stockpiling, subsidizing new projects, and tightening controls on technology. Then China responds again. Then Washington responds again. Then companies adjust. Then markets reprice. Then governments discover new vulnerabilities. This is how economic confrontation develops. Not in one dramatic moment, but in cycles. Restriction, retaliation, adaptation, substitution, escalation, negotiation, and then another restriction. This cycle is one reason export controls rarely produce clean victories. They may slow China's technological progress in certain areas. They may deny access to the very best chips or tools. They may raise costs and force difficult trade-offs, but they can also accelerate China's determination to become more self-sufficient. A country that fears being cut off will spend heavily to reduce the power of the cut-off. It will subsidize domestic firms. It will tolerate inefficiency. It will mobilize universities. It will encourage engineers to solve problems once outsourced to foreign suppliers. It will search for workarounds. It will improve software efficiency. It will use older chips more intelligently. It will build local ecosystems not because they are cheaper, but because they are politically necessary. This is the paradox of technological containment. The more successful it appears in the short term, the more it may teach the rival to survive without you in the long term. Sanctions can hurt, but sanctions can also educate. Export controls can slow, but they can also motivate. Economic pressure can weaken dependence, but it can also create a new doctrine of self-reliance. China's strategy reflects this. Beijing is pouring resources into domestic semiconductor capacity, industrial upgrading, AI development, electric vehicles, batteries, renewable energy, robotics, and advanced manufacturing. It wants to reduce dependence on foreign technology where dependence can be turned into pressure. It also uses its own forms of economic power. Export controls on critical minerals, pressure on foreign firms, industrial subsidies, market access, domestic standards, local currency trade, alternative payment channels, strategic purchasing. The objective is not only growth, it is resilience under pressure. America's strategy is also broader than export controls. Washington is trying to preserve leadership in advanced technology, protect military-relevant capabilities, rebuild domestic industrial capacity, and coordinate with allies. It is using export controls, investment screening, sanctions, subsidies, procurement, defense spending, and diplomatic pressure. The objective is not only to compete with China, it is to prevent the United States from losing control over the technologies that shape future power. Both sides are acting from strategic fear. America fears that China could use open access to advanced technology to challenge US military, economic, and technological dominance. China fears that America could use its position in chips, finance, alliances, and software to block China's rise. Each side sees the other's defensive measures as offensive. Each side interprets resilience as preparation for confrontation. This is why the situation is so difficult to manage. Even policies designed to reduce vulnerability can look like escalation. And nowhere is that clearer than in artificial intelligence. AI is the symbol of the new industrial race because it seems to touch everything at once. The winner may not simply have better chatbots. It may have better logistics, better weapons design, better intelligence analysis, better cyber tools, better biotech research, better industrial automation, better energy optimization, better financial modeling, better surveillance, better education systems, and better scientific discovery. If that sounds too broad, that is exactly why governments are alarmed. AI is not one industry. It is a general-purpose technology, like electricity, like the combustion engine, like computing itself. And general-purpose technologies change the balance of power because they improve everything around them. But AI depends on compute. Compute depends on chips. Chips depend on machines, materials, energy, software, and manufacturing. So the AI race becomes a chip race. The chip race becomes an equipment race. The equipment race becomes a mineral race. The mineral race becomes an energy race. And the energy race becomes a national security question. Data centers are now strategic infrastructure. They consume large amounts of electricity. They require reliable grids. They require land, water, cooling, fiber connections, security, and access to advanced hardware. A country can announce an AI strategy. But if it cannot power the data centers, it cannot execute the strategy. A company can announce a frontier model. But if it cannot access the chips, it cannot train at the same scale. A military can speak of autonomous systems. But if its supply chain depends on a rival, the doctrine becomes fragile. This is why chips, energy, and AI must be understood as one system. And this system is becoming more political every year. For ordinary people, this may still sound distant, but it is not. If supply chains fragment, electronics can become more expensive. Vehicles can become more expensive. Appliances can become more expensive. Energy systems can become more expensive. Government subsidies can redirect tax money toward factories, defense, and strategic industries. Some workers may benefit from new domestic manufacturing. Others may lose jobs when companies exposed to China, Taiwan, or global trade face disruption. Innovation may speed up in protected sectors, but slow down if researchers, firms, and markets are split into rival ecosystems. Investors may see enormous winners and sudden losers. A stock can rise on AI demand and fall on export control news. A mining company can become strategic overnight. A data center developer can become part of national infrastructure. A chip equipment firm can become a foreign policy problem. This is the new map of power. It does not look like a battlefield. It looks like earnings calls, license applications, customs declarations, factory announcements, power grid plans, and government subsidy packages. But the strategic stakes are real. A Churchillian mind would likely warn that nations must not confuse consumption with strength. A country can have endless devices on store shelves and still lack the ability to produce the systems that matter. It can have advanced software companies and still depend on foreign fabrication. It can have wealthy consumers and still be vulnerable in minerals. It can have financial markets and still lack industrial depth. Churchill understood that the factory is not separate from the battlefield. In his time, aircraft production, radar, shipping, and fuel shaped survival. In our time, chip fabs, data centers, mineral refineries, ports, cloud platforms, and energy grids may shape the balance of power. A nation that outsources the foundations of its own security may discover too late that efficiency was not the same as safety. But the economic Iron Curtain is not made of chips alone. It is also made of money. And in the modern world, the power to clear a payment, hold a reserve, price a commodity, or sanction a bank can be as strategic as the power to move a fleet. Every empire has a map. In the modern world, one of the most important maps is financial. It shows where money moves, which currency prices trade, which banks clear payments, which countries hold reserves, which markets provide liquidity, and who can be cut off when politics turns hostile. This map is less visible than a naval map, but it may be just as powerful. Because in the 21st century, the ability to move money can decide whether a country can buy oil, import food, settle trade, finance debt, insure cargo, pay suppliers, or survive sanctions. The economic Iron Curtain is not only made of chips and minerals. It is also made of payment systems, reserve currencies, capital markets, banking rules, sanctions lists, debt markets, and trust. For now, the center of this financial map remains the United States dollar. The dollar is still the dominant currency in global reserves, trade invoicing, debt issuance, commodity pricing, and international finance. It is supported by the scale of the American economy, the depth of US Treasury markets, the liquidity of American financial markets, the rule-based architecture of the dollar system, and the fact that global habits do not change quickly. The Federal Reserve's 2025 review of the dollar's international role describes this dominance as supported by the size, strength, openness, and liquidity of the US system, even as other currencies slowly gain limited ground. This matters because dollar dominance gives Washington a form of power that no aircraft carrier can fully explain. If a large share of global trade and finance touches the dollar system, then American sanctions can reach far beyond American borders. A bank in one country may avoid dealing with a sanctioned entity in another country because it fears losing access to dollar clearing. A company may abandon a transaction not because its own government banned it, but because the financial risk has become too great. A shipping insurer may hesitate. A lender may withdraw. A supplier may refuse. A payment may not clear. This is financial power. It works not only through force, but through access. The United States does not need to control every bank in the world if enough banks need access to the system it sits at the center of. That is why sanctions have become one of the most important tools of modern statecraft. They can punish aggression. They can target criminal networks. They can pressure regimes. They can restrict access to technology, capital, and markets. They can be used without deploying troops. But sanctions also create a strategic response. Every country watching the use of financial sanctions understands the lesson. If access can be denied, dependence becomes a risk. If reserves can be frozen, reserves become political. If payment systems can be weaponized, payment systems become infrastructure of power. This does not mean the dollar is about to collapse. It does not mean the yuan will quickly replace it. Those claims are too simple, and they ignore the realities of global finance. But it does mean that more countries are asking how much exposure they want to a system that can be used against them in a crisis. That is the more serious story, not the sudden death of the dollar, the gradual search for partial alternatives. Reuters has reported that central banks and sovereign investors are increasingly discussing diversification, gold, energy assets, and concerns about the long-term role of the dollar, even while the dollar remains dominant. Recent surveys show more institutions thinking about a multipolar reserve world, not a clean replacement of the dollar by one rival currency. China understands this very well. Beijing has promoted greater international use of the yuan. It has encouraged some local currency trade. It has built payment infrastructure. It has sought financial resilience against US sanctions. It has tried to reduce dependence on American-controlled channels where possible. But the yuan faces serious limits. China maintains capital controls. The yuan is not freely convertible in the same way as the dollar. Global investors often want legal predictability, deep markets, transparency, and the ability to move money quickly and freely. Many countries may want less dependence on the dollar, but that does not automatically mean they want massive dependence on the yuan. Trust is not created by ambition alone. Reserve currency status is not declared. It is earned over decades through liquidity, openness, credibility, legal structure, market depth, and habit. This is why the most plausible future is not a simple replacement of the dollar. It is fragmentation. The dollar remains dominant, but more countries build partial alternatives. Some trade is settled in local currencies. Some central banks buy more gold. Some sanctioned or sanction-fearing states develop parallel systems. Some regional blocs deepen internal payment arrangements. Some companies build financial structures that can survive political shocks. The world does not abandon the dollar. It hedges against the dollar. That difference matters. A single global financial order may slowly become a layered system. One layer remains dollar-centered, liquid, deep, and powerful. Another layer grows around local currency trade. Another layer develops around countries trying to avoid sanctions exposure. Another layer forms around digital payment systems, central bank experiments, commodity deals, and bilateral arrangements. This is not yet a new world currency order. It is a world preparing for the possibility that finance itself may become a battlefield. And once money becomes political infrastructure, every major economic decision changes. Tariffs are part of the same transformation. A tariff is often described as a tax on imports, and technically that is true. But in the new confrontation, Tariffs are more than taxes. They are tools to force production shifts, punish rivals, protect domestic industries, reduce dependence, pressure negotiations, and signal political strength. A government can use tariffs to make foreign goods less attractive. It can use them to encourage companies to move production. It can use them to defend industries considered strategic. It can use them to tell voters that the state is fighting back. But tariffs carry costs. They can raise prices for consumers. They can increase costs for businesses that depend on imported components. They can provoke retaliation. They can protect some jobs while endangering others. They can create political theatre without creating industrial capacity. A tariff may make an imported electric vehicle more expensive, but it does not automatically build a competitive domestic battery chain. A tariff may protect a steel plant, but it may raise costs for manufacturers using steel. A tariff may punish a rival, but the bill may be paid partly by domestic households and companies. This is why industrial policy has returned. Governments now understand that tariffs alone cannot build the machinery of the future. If a country wants semiconductor fabs, battery plants, mineral refineries, shipyards, data centers, defense factories, and energy infrastructure, it needs capital, workers, permits, power, customers, technology, and time. So the state comes back. Subsidies return. Tax credits return. Public-private partnerships return. Strategic investment returns. Procurement policy returns. National development language returns. This can be necessary. A country that depends entirely on rivals for critical systems may not be truly secure. But industrial policy also carries danger. It can create waste. It can reward political connections. It can preserve weak firms. It can become subsidy addiction. It can trigger races between allies, where each government pays more to attract the same factory. It can protect industries from competition so much that they become comfortable rather than excellent. The goal should be resilience, not permanent inefficiency. That balance is difficult, and it is exactly the balance many governments are now trying to find. The old globalization rewarded the lowest cost. The new order rewards the lowest political risk. Those are not the same thing. A company may now build one supply chain for the American market, another for China, another for Europe, and another for politically sensitive products. It may duplicate factories. It may hold more inventory. It may pay more for insurance. It may avoid certain suppliers. It may move assembly to Vietnam, Mexico, India, or Southeast Asia. It may still rely on China for components while trying to reduce exposure. It may publicly speak about resilience while privately hoping the old system continues long enough to protect profits. This is how supply chain blocks form, not always through formal alliances. Sometimes through quiet, corporate adaptation. One possible future is not a clean American bloc versus a Chinese bloc. It may be far more complex. There may be US-aligned technology standards in advanced chips, AI, defense, cloud security, and sensitive data. There may be China-centered manufacturing networks across electronics, batteries, industrial goods, and consumer products. Europe may keep searching for strategic autonomy, trying to avoid total dependence on either Washington or Beijing. India, Vietnam, Mexico, Indonesia, Malaysia, and other countries may benefit from diversification as companies seek alternatives. Resource-rich nations may gain leverage because minerals are no longer treated as ordinary commodities. Middle powers may try to remain non-aligned, accepting investment from both sides while resisting pressure to choose. Companies may attempt to operate in both ecosystems until rules make it impossible. This is not a clean curtain. It is a curtain with gaps, exceptions, tunnels, and contradictions. But it is still a curtain, because the direction is towards separation in the systems that matter most. Chips, AI, defense technology, critical minerals, energy infrastructure. Data, cloud systems, payments, sanctions, strategic manufacturing. The world may remain connected in consumer goods, tourism, agriculture, entertainment, and ordinary trade. But in the commanding heights of future power, governments are drawing harder lines. The IMF has warned that deeper geopolitical fragmentation and renewed trade tensions could weaken growth and unsettle markets. Its 2026 World Economic Outlook placed these risks alongside debt pressures, conflict, and uncertainty around AI-driven productivity. That is the economic cost of a more divided world. Slower growth, higher prices, duplicated factories, more political pressure on companies, more export bans, more strategic stockpiling, more resource nationalism, more uncertainty, less trust. A supply chain built for maximum efficiency is fragile in a crisis. But a supply chain built for maximum security can be expensive in normal life. That is the trade-off. And ordinary people will not experience it as a geopolitical theory. They will experience it as the price of a car, the cost of a phone, the availability of spare parts, the electricity bill, the taxes needed to fund subsidies, the job created in a new factory, the job lost when a company loses access to a market, the pension account rising with defense and AI stocks, then falling when export controls hit revenue, the local town celebrating a battery plant, the local business struggling because imported inputs are more expensive. Security is rarely free, and when governments decide that resilience matters more than efficiency, the bill eventually reaches the public. This does not mean fragmentation has no benefits. Some supply chains were too fragile. Some dependencies were strategically reckless. Some industries were allowed to disappear without anyone asking what would happen in a crisis. Some countries discovered that cheap goods had hidden costs. A more resilient world may create stronger domestic manufacturing. It may reduce dependence on strategic rivals. It may encourage investment in energy, minerals, defense, and infrastructure. It may force governments to take critical systems seriously. It may make coercion harder. It may give workers in some countries new opportunities. It may prevent a future crisis from becoming catastrophic. But the cost must be admitted honestly. A public told only that reshoring will bring jobs may not be prepared for higher prices. A public told only that tariffs punish foreigners may not understand that consumers often pay part of the bill. A public told only that sanctions are clean tools may not see how they encourage rival systems. A public told only that globalization was good may not understand how dependence became dangerous. And a public told only that globalization was bad may not understand how much prosperity it created. This is why the debate must be serious, not hysterical, not naive, not propagandistic. The choice is not between perfect globalization and total separation. The choice is how to manage dependence in a world where trust has declined. A Churchillian mind might not mourn the loss of naive globalization if it made free nations dependent on strategic rivals. He would likely understand that comfort can become a trap. He would understand that a nation able to buy everything cheaply may still be weak if it can build nothing essential. He would understand that factories, ports, energy systems, ships, money, science, and alliances are not secondary to security. They are security. But he would also warn against economic nationalism becoming blind hostility. Strength is not hatred. Resilience is not isolation. Preparation is not a declaration of war. The objective should not be permanent economic siege. The objective should be strength, honesty, resilience, and negotiation from a position that cannot be easily blackmailed. Peace requires more than goodwill. It requires the other side to know that coercion will not succeed. That principle applies to chips. It applies to minerals. It applies to currencies. It applies to sanctions. It applies to shipping routes. It applies to Taiwan. It applies to the South China Sea. It applies to data centers, AI models, ports, satellites, undersea cables, and payment systems. The danger is not only that America and China compete. Great powers always compete. The danger is that competition becomes so total, so suspicious, and so self-reinforcing that every economic decision is treated as a hostile act. A chip sale becomes a military threat. A mineral license becomes retaliation. A tariff becomes a loyalty test. A port investment becomes a security crisis. A payment network becomes a weapon. A technology standard becomes a border. A company becomes a battlefield. This is how an economic Cold War can harden, not through one dramatic announcement, but through thousands of decisions that teach both sides to expect the worst. The most dangerous scenario is not simply that the world divides. It is that the world divides while pretending it has not. Companies continue to speak the language of global markets while governments write the rules of strategic rivalry. Consumers expect low prices while states demand secure supply chains. Investors expect growth while politicians demand decoupling. Allies expect coordination while competing for the same factories. Countries demand sovereignty while depending on someone else's chips, minerals, software, financing, and ships. These contradictions cannot last forever without consequences. Eventually, the cost appears in prices, in deficits, in shortages, in slower growth, in political anger, in market volatility, in pressure on smaller nations to choose sides, in the risk that economic confrontation spills into military confrontation. Taiwan remains the most dangerous flashpoint because it sits where military geography and semiconductor geography meet. The South China Sea remains dangerous because shipping routes, resources, sovereignty claims, and naval power meet there. Cyber conflict remains dangerous because digital infrastructure can be attacked without warning. Information warfare remains dangerous because divided societies are easier to pressure. Financial sanctions remain powerful but risky because every use teaches others to prepare for the next one. This is the cold logic of fragmentation. Every tool of pressure creates a tool of defense. Every tool of defense looks like preparation for escalation. Every escalation creates new justification for more pressure. The cycle can be managed, but it cannot be managed by denial. So has the new Cold War already started. Not in the old form, not with a single wall, not with two perfectly sealed camps, not with the same ideological map as the 20th century, not with a world where every country knows exactly which side it belongs to. But yes, something has changed. The world is building barriers around the systems that matter most. Chips, minerals, data, energy, finance, factories, shipping, artificial intelligence, money. The old globalization was built on the belief that everyone could depend on everyone. The new order is being built on the fear that dependence is a weapon waiting to be used. That fear may be justified in some cases. It may be exaggerated in others. But once enough governments believe it, the world changes. The first Iron Curtain divided cities, families, armies, and ideologies. The new economic Iron Curtain may divide supply chains, currencies, factories, software, minerals, and machines. It may not look as dramatic as a wall in Berlin, but it may reach further. Into the phone in your hand, the car in your driveway, the price of electricity, the job in your town, the chip inside a missile, the server training an AI model, the currency in which a nation borrows, the port through which food and fuel move, the cloud that stores a company's data, the payment system that clears a trade, the mineral inside a motor, the factory that decides whether a country can build in a crisis. A Churchillian mind would likely see the warning clearly. A free world that cannot build, power, protect, and finance its own future may remain free in language long after it has become dependent in fact. That does not mean every country must retreat behind walls. It means openness without strength becomes vulnerability. Trade without resilience becomes exposure. Peace without preparation becomes hope disguised as strategy. The question is not whether America and China will compete. They already do. The question is whether that competition can be managed before an economic Cold War becomes something colder, harder, and more dangerous than economics alone. Because the most important wall of this century may never be seen from space. It may be written in export licenses, hidden in supply contracts, buried inside payment systems, etched onto silicon, refined into magnets, coded into AI models, priced into markets, and felt finally by ordinary people who were never asked whether the age of easy globalization was ending. The wall is rising quietly. The test now is whether the world can build resilience without building a cage, whether nations can compete without losing control, whether power can be balanced before pressure becomes panic, and whether the machinery of the future will become a bridge between civilizations or the new Iron Curtain that divides them.